All right, so now we're ready to get into XD and start messing around with it, okay? Let's go ahead and if you go up to File and then do New, you should get this screen right here. And if you want, you can do the tutorial. It'll kind of walk you through it if this is still available by the time you're watching this video. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. So first thing I know that I want to do is I want to go ahead and we talk about doing a mobile first design, and I know that I'm going to have enough content to have a larger layout, and because I'm not writing my media queries right now, I want to go ahead and actually design my larger layout because in some ways um, I know that my design is going to be simple enough that it's going to make a lot of sense as a mobile design. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do the 1920 version first. and And so what this is going to be doing is creating an artboard. So if I click up here where it says Web 1920-1, that's my first 1920 artboard. And what that means is 1920 by 1080. And so it's 1920 wide by 1080 tall, which is a pretty standard HD resolution. So anyway, if I do that as a kind of a large screen scenario, then I can just click the name up here and it highlights the entire artboard. And if you look at this, you want to think of this as the viewport, and you want to think this bottom line as being the fold. Now, there's some things that I'm going to show you in just a minute that I think you definitely want to think about in terms of scrolling and being able to make repeatable regions. But for right now, I'm just going to leave this alone. But just remember that if you click off of this and you're trying to get the boundaries of the artboard and there's other artwork on here, you might not be able to get it to highlight like that. So you can always come up here and click on the word. All right. Now, there's some things that I want to show you also really quickly about XD. And one of the things is if you click down here in this little sort of gear thing, it says assets. Right now we don't have any assets set up. So if you want, you could bring some assets in and you could like save colors and color palette so that you can go ahead and use them and so on. It's really up to you, but what you need to actually do is have objects that are on the screen in order for you to select from them to add them as swatches or character styles or symbols. All right, and symbols would be things like if you've drawn some kind of vector shape, you can create a grouped object as a symbol, or I should say grouped sets of objects as a symbol, and it becomes reusable. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'm not going to go into great detail, but this will help a lot. All right, so one of the things I'm going to show you too is I'm on a trackpad, and so I can pinch and zoom, right, to make that bigger or smaller. You can also, if you don't have a trackpad, you can use this zoom tool to zoom in and zoom out. So this is your selection tool up here, this little arrow, and this is basically a very simple vector tool in a lot of ways. It's not going to have quite the same capabilities as say Illustrator, so for some people that might frustrate them. But what's nice is that you can do artwork, you can make artwork in Illustrator and Photoshop, and you can import it, so that's a plus. Okay, but if I come over here, this is a rectangle tool. It allows me to draw objects. And what's nice is that these objects are really easy to manipulate. You can draw multiple objects, you can delete them. I have to go back and select my arrow tool though to select the object. And then over here in the right panel, it shows me the width and it shows me the height. And if you want to keep those constrained, you can, so that if I scale that, it'll scale it proportionally. Otherwise, you can take the constraint off, and then you can see it scales only in one dimension. And then it also has the X and Y coordinates, which is good. Like if you wanted to make sure something is in the top left corner, you could type in, for instance, 0 and 0, right? And then you know that it's definitely cinched right up there to the top left corner. And so on. Okay, you can also rotate the objects and stuff, right? Now to give it a fill, you can click here and you can use your color picker. And this is where you know, it would be really handy for us to go ahead and have some of our swatches. So, you know, handy, let's go ahead and grab that really quick and I'll show you. So for instance, if you went into our other resources file that I created in my Canon Electric site for my mockup, see we're in the mockup, I can open this web page, all right, and these are the colors that I had chosen for my samples. And now I can just apply these as I want. The other thing that you could do is just so that they'll already be ready to go. Like for instance, I think for sure that I'm going to use that. So I'm going to copy that hexadecimal number and I could go ahead and paste it in here. And then if I hit return, you see it turns that color. And so the other thing that I can do now is while this is selected, while this object is selected over here in colors, you see how the plus symbol is no longer grayed out. If I click on that, you see it automatically goes ahead and it adds the color. Now you might be wondering, well, what is this gray all about? It's because I had a border. It's automatically going to show a border, right? And so because I had that border set there, it went ahead and it grabbed that middle gray. So if I go and I'm going to undo that, all right, and if I don't want that border there, I can just unselect that or deselect that, and then I can add the color, and then there's my color, all right. And then the other thing that I can do is if I go back to that web page, like I know that I want to use that blue, I'm pretty sure I do, I can go ahead and copy that, and for my fill, I can just change it here, right, and commit to it, and then while this is still selected, I can add the color again. Right, so I've got two of these basic colors, and then I could add some of the other colors if I wanted. Let's just jump back there. And, you know, for instance, maybe these darker blues would be good too. I think maybe I'll take the dark blue, so I'll copy that. That might be a good like hover state for a button or something. And so let's just come over here. We'll change that fill up, see what that looks like. That's a probably pretty good blue that would be consistent. I'll go ahead and I'll add that. There's my darker version of it. And then later, if I want to go and adjust it, I can. And so that's a good place to start, I think. I don't know that I need to grab any of these other colors for right now. I might want this really light peach color. It might be good as a link color, possibly. And so let's just go ahead and do that. And while I have that selected, there, I'll add that. Okay, and so at least now I've got some of my stuff selected, and then if I have this object here, I could go, okay, well, let's just make that a different color, and you see I can just now just really easily apply them. So that's a handy tool. And I'm not going to bother to add my character styles until I actually have an idea of how big I want things to be, because it will also remember not just the color and the typography or choice, your font choice, it'll also remember the scale. All right, so let's get to designing. So one of the first things that I think that I definitely want is I need a header section, right? Because if you remember from the previous lectures in WordPress, template hierarchy and all of that stuff, I went through some of the basic parts of the page, and there's always a header of some sort. I don't necessarily have to have a banner if I don't want. That's really kind of up to you, but you do need some way of identifying where like the main navigation's going to go, and like where the H1, the page title would go, and the tagline and stuff if you want the tagline to show up. So all right, what I'm going to do then is go ahead and draw this out, because I think that this might be a nice background color for that logo. And I think maybe let's just make it, I don't know, somewhere like 180, 170, something like that, pixels tall. And remember, this is a very wide screen. It's a very large screen. It's like if you were to take a look at it, let's just take a look real quick. If I select this artboard right here, like that, and I hit the play button, you can see that that is the scale that it would actually be on this larger screen, right? So, I might look at that and maybe 200 is a more appropriate size. Okay, so maybe I'm okay with that, and you can always hit the play button and see if that's a size that you would like for your header. Now, if I want this header to be persistent, I don't know if I always want it to be that big, because also I'm going to have the navigation right here, I think. So that might be a little bit big. All right, so I think you know, if you think about that other header being right there, then makes me think maybe I don't want it to go there, or I don't want it to be that large. So I think I might go back down the extra 30 pixels to somewhere around 170, because I also need to give myself a little bit of space here for the navigational area. And so I can go ahead and draw that box as well. So let's do that. Let's draw that box out, and then we can tell it about how big we want it to be. Let's just say that that's going to be somewhere in the ballpark of like 70 pixels. All right, and see if that's a proportional size, and then we can give it a background color. And I'm thinking that this might be sort of a combination that I want for the top and the top area, and then I would need my logo graphic, and that'll help me tell what I need it to look like and stuff. So if I want to import a graphic, first of all, I need to save this somewhere. Right now it's not saved. So if I go ahead and I click on save, I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to find my mockup folder that I started. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and save it outside of the Canon Electric site, right, just in my mockup folder, and I'll call it Canon Electric, yeah, mockup. Okay, and I'll go ahead and save that. And now if I want, now that I've saved it, it'll know the pathway to the asset files that it's going to pull in. So I can go up here to File, and I can say Import. I can look and see there's my Canon Electric mockup file that I just saved. So if I go inside of that Canon Electric file, and then I can go into Logos and Font, and I can find the appropriate one. I decided we're not going to do the red one, at least I'm not. And then you can take a look at these. And I want to show you a couple of things. So I think the reason I want to use this one, I think, is because right here is where I want the tagline to go beneath it, but I want that to be in regular HTML because it's gonna look a little bit better, and because then it'll be selectable text. So it's the one that says something like 24/7 services available or whatever it says, right? And so anyway, here we've got this, and this is a PNG that's transparent. Now this one's an SVG, so you might go, hey, let's just use the SVG. Now, one of the things that you need to realize is that if the SVG was saved in such a way that the stroke is not set to scale, then here's what's going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. Let me just show you this. And it looks nice and crisp and clean, right? But if I start to scale it, look what's happening. The stroke just gets way, way too heavy. So let's talk about some SVG issues. Just because somebody gives you an SVG doesn't mean, first of all, that it's good to go, right? So this is a sort of a learning lesson that I'm going to give you guys. All right, one of the things that you need to be aware of, I want to show you a few tips and tricks. One is that just because it looks funky in XD doesn't mean it's going to look funky everywhere. So if I hit play, it's still doing that weird thing, and it's like making the stroke really big. It's like not scaling the stroke properly. So it makes me wonder what else about this file maybe could be fixed. First thing I guess I should go ahead and do is I want to show you a little trick about how you can test stuff out in browsers. So you can literally just take an SVG file and drag it into a browser, and I'm going to show you that you should drag something into multiple browsers, and let me show you why. So if I go up here and I open a new Chrome window, and I'm just going to drag that into that browser. And if I start to scale it, you notice that it actually scales just fine in Chrome, right? So it's not treating it the same way that it was treating it in XD. Now, if I go, let's say, into Firefox, let's see what happens there. So let's try this. Oh, look what happened. It's all messed up because it doesn't have the font saved inside of it, and it's not reading the fonts off the computer for some reason. All right, so, or at least Firefox isn't. So that means that when this was created, it wasn't created with outlines, and the font is not being served up from, it's not being like Google fonted, right? Web hosted. In the code, it's not pointing to some sort of web host. So let's take a look at some of the things that we can do. I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks in Illustrator. So if you were to open Illustrator, all right, let's go ahead and I'm just going to take this logo and I'm going to right click. Let's right click it and we'll say open with and Adobe Illustrator. All right, so a couple things that I want to show you about SVGs. There are a lot of tricks about SVGs, but one of the first things that I want to show you while I have my stroke panel open, actually, let's do that first, is that if I click over here and I'm selecting the word Canon, and it looks like it's actually got some of these letters separated, probably because I'm in a different version of Illustrator. Sometimes that'll happen. If you have something that's an old version of Illustrator, you open a new, it'll start to separate the text elements out from each other. So first of all, if I double click this, you'll notice that it's still text editable. That means that it's still set up as text. So the first thing that I would like to do then is I want to select all of that text. And then if I go up here to type, I can choose create outlines. And that is no longer, that text is no longer editable text. Now look what happened. I missed the E because that one was separated. So I still need to go back and go to type and create outlines. Now if I double click it, you see that it actually selects the object as an object. It's no longer an editable font. Okay, so the next thing that I would want to look at is, let's just take one of these selections and let's look at how the stroke is set up. The stroke is actually set up correctly. You want this so that the stroke is set in the center, not like on the outside or the inside whenever you're saving out SVGs. That's a good thing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this E letter, and it looks like for some reason it doesn't have a stroke. Look what happened. It separated this one out whenever it created outlines. If I double click inside of here, you'll see that let's come inside of here and you'll see that I've got something going on where I've got this object that is a stroke, but then I don't see, and then we've got this fill here. So it's doing something a little bit strange. So just be aware that sometimes whenever you have some of your fonts and stuff, it'll kind of get messed up. But anyway, you ideally want to have your strokes so that they're set dead center. Okay. The other thing that you want to test and check is if you go up here to Illustrator, you can go to Preferences and to General, and by default this is typically turned off, this Use Preview Bounds. You want to go ahead and turn that on. Using the preview bounds will allow it to not clip things and do things in a weird way. And then you've got scale corners, scale stroke, and effects. That doesn't necessarily translate, just so you know, to the SVG, but we can go ahead and set it that way anyhow. And then the other thing is, let's take a look at this object over here. Yeah, these objects are discrete and independent, which is fine. I think in one of the other SVGs, for instance, this letter E, it might be two pieces, and if that's the case, one of the things you could do to simplify it, looks like I've already simplified this, but if that's the case, if the stem right here is possibly not, it's just grouped, it's not connected with this curved area. So what you could do is you could select both of those and you could go into your Pathfinder and choose to do this one where you combine the paths. It looks like it's already been done. But if I select that object, let's blow this up a little bit. That object you see over here has a fill, which is fine. I can select this object, which is a fill, which is fine. And then this object back here is also a fill. Now, I just want to make a point also to bring this up. This is something that I made a modification to. I think I made a modification before and I saved it by accident. But this was, by the way, this was a stroke and it had an empty fill. So I reversed them and I had to increase the scale of the circle. And then at least then that way the stroke issue won't be a problem. But we still might have a stroke problem with these. It's a very good chance that that's going to be true. So let's just go ahead and we can either save the file as is, which is fine, or you could do a save as. but I'm going to do a save a copy because I want to show you something. If I just save it, it'll save it with some of the other presets. So I'm going to go ahead and go into logos and fonts, and I'll save the copy here, and I will put, I'll call it modified. And when I click save, it's going to pop up with this option, and it tells me, hey, try export for screens. You can do that, but if you are trying to be really specific about some of the things that you set properly, then you might not want to do export for screens. Like if you're trying to fix some things, you want to make sure that the type is just regular SVG, SVG 1.1. Don't do any of these other ones. Sometimes newer browsers won't read the settings properly. I mean, older browsers, sorry. Image location, we don't really have an image location, but you can leave that as a link. The other thing is because had I actually had a font in here, it would have given me a font option. And if that were the case, it would ask me, do I want to use web font? Do I want to, like, what kind of fonts do I want to embed the font? Like, it would have given me some other options. And so it's a lot better if you just do it as a create outline. And then here, you're okay with these. You want to make sure responsive is checked and so on. If this isn't showing up, you have to click more options, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and it should have saved that. Now let's go back and do a test. Here's our modified version. Let's see what happens in Firefox. If I drop that into Firefox, there we go. Except look what's happening in Firefox. My SVG, it's like misaligned. It doesn't look right. You see that? See how that's happening? But at least it's scaling without any trouble. One of the things that I could do, it looks like the yellow is not lining up properly. So I'm just curious how it looks in Chrome, if it's still giving me the same problem. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's try that again. And it looks okay in Chrome. So that's something that's also a lesson that you need to think about. And it makes me wonder, okay, well, if I were to, let's just close this. I'm gonna click on don't save. I'm gonna open that copy up. So let's go to open, and we'll choose our modified version. And one of the things that you can do, see here we've got this yellow fill, and I'm gonna just choose to make that have, actually, we're gonna delete that because that fill is giving us trouble. So I'm gonna delete that fill like that. Okay, and now what I can do is I want to make sure that I'm going to copy that hexadecimal number, and what I can do is I can come in to these areas, right, where I've got the stroke, because remember before we had a stroke but the fill wasn't attached. So I'm going to go ahead and give that each of these a fill that's that yellow color. All right, so this is one of the ways that you might sometimes need to go and optimize SVGs so that they show up properly in all of your browsers. Okay, and so let's just continue going through each and every one of these, and then we get back into this one. We can give it a fill, and let's go and see if it's going to behave the same way. Give that a fill. All right. And see if these things are going to behave. Let's save that and let's do a test. Oops. Get back into our Firefox here, find our modified, and there you go. That looks better. All right, it's behaving now. All right, so here's the thing. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Here's the thing about this. Let's just close that out too for now. Oh, and one other thing too I didn't mention is that when you go, let's do save a copy just so I can show you. Yeah, let's just save it like that. And then right here, I didn't mention this before, but where it says preserve Illustrator editing capabilities, you want to make sure that that is deselected if you're doing something that's your final version that's going to be web ready, because otherwise it saves a whole bunch of extra code inside the SVG. I'm going to cancel this, that you don't need. All right, and so and the other thing too to optimize as well is make sure that if you have something, this should be okay, but go into your layers and make sure that you don't have a bunch of unnecessary hidden layers and stuff. A lot of times when you're working, it's just really easy. Let me click OK. It's really easy to forget to just remove old unnecessary layers, so make sure you get rid of objects that you're not using. That helps optimize as well. Also, being sure to simplify the paths. So if you've got a whole bunch of extra anchor points, you can always go to Object, Path, and then you can choose Simplify when you have something selected and see how it's going to look. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Let's come back here now. I'm just going to delete this off the screen. Let's just see. Now, there's no guarantee that this stroke is going to work any better, but let's just go here and let's import our modified version and see if it's any better and see if it scales. And it scales a little bit better, but actually it scales a lot better, but it still isn't ideal, right? But here's the thing, we know that that's just what's happening in XD. I would strongly recommend that you do SVG checking in lots of different things before you count on them, right? So the other thing that I could have also done, which we didn't discuss, is that if you know that you want an SVG for a certain size, you can also export it out of Illustrator as a smaller version, and it will scale as part of the export process. It'll scale your strokes a little bit better. But the thing is that this is just a prototype, right? Although this is one of the stages where I realized that I was having these issues with my SVGs, so that's good. I could go ahead and use this knowing, for instance, that that it might, that the stroke might not be this thick. Normally, like that's just too big. I don't want it to, take up that much room. And so if I scale it, like that just starts to get too heavy. That's too heavy duty looking. So if I want it to look okay for my prototype, this is where I could say, you know what, in the real version, I'm going to use the SVG, but in my prototype, I'm actually going to use like a PNG. Actually, here, let's just go ahead. Let's place that one more time and let's do a test one more time really quickly. So let's scale this down so that it's, like that size. And then if I go up here and I hit play, you still see that it looks bad, right? So it's not just that it looks bad in the preview mode. So I wanted to make that point as well. I want to go up here to import the PNG version. And so you'll see we've got the PNG right there. Yep, that's the right one. Okay, and that one's probably about the right size. Okay, and so that's going to be good for just using in our mockup.